Today we're going to talk about what it means to create and foster a thriving content ecosystem. Now this is a very key idea within the context of your cause, your content, and your community. So it's really important for us to wrestle with this and understand the implications of this. But first I'd like to start with a verse. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 23 says, "For you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and enduring Word of God." Now think about what that means, the living and enduring Word of God. We are the incarnation of Christ. He lives in us. And so the words that we speak, because of the power of Jesus, we have living words as well. But what I've seen so often is that we trap our words in products and we see them as dead things on pages rather than things that are living. And what that has caused us to do is not see our words, the content that we're sharing as authors, as something that is living and breathing and impacting people's lives. Instead, we see it as a product on a shelf, just like behind me you see lots of books on shelves. And we forget about them, and they lose their power. They lose their impact. And so what we're going to talk about today is the idea of a content ecosystem and how that content ecosystem allows ideas to come to life in some pretty powerful ways. But we have two main problems that we really have to deal with as we're thinking about that. First of all, our content has been siloed in products, whether it be a training, whether it be a book, whether it be a song, whatever the case might be. We've siloed content into one thing, and we've said it really only fits there. And so we have to deal with that issue because things can never thrive when they're isolated. The second thing that we have to deal with is that there's just so much content today. I mean, it just is everywhere. A quote from Mike Lynch, who's the CEO of Autonomy, says, 90% of all information ever created has been produced in the last 2 years alone. Imagine how much data that is. Imagine how much content. No wonder we feel overwhelmed by it all. But unless we can create an environment where content makes sense, where it doesn't feel overwhelming, we're never going to thrive as we engage with our content. So let's talk about this a little bit more. What does it mean to have a content ecosystem? Well, right now we have this dead content. And essentially what's happened is we've taken these lively, powerful ideas that were birthed in our brains that God gave us. We decide to be generous with them, but instead we entomb them in a product with very little hope of a resurrection. So a content ecosystem is essentially saying, let's free those ideas again. Let's put them in an environment where those ideas are going to help people thrive. Now, this idea of a content ecosystem is essentially very simple. It's just like the idea of a natural ecosystem. So I'm going to use an analogy that's a little bit like that. So first of all, we have the earth, right? The core of any ecosystem is the ground. That's the foundation. That's the thing that brings life to everything else. And the ground in our analogy is our cause. The richness and deepness of the ground or the earth, just like the richness or deepness of the cause, will define the richness of everything else that lives in that ecosystem. So we start off with the ground, we start out with the earth and the cause. Then we move on to the vegetation. You know, whenever you see pictures of ecosystems, the ones that are showing thriving ecosystems always show amazing lush grass and trees and vegetation. Well, that vegetation in our example is our content. Out of the richness of the soil of our cause grows this amazing content that speaks to the issue, that talks about this big idea that God has birthed into our hearts. Now, usually with authors, they stop there. They say, oh, I've got great ground, I've got great grass, and now let me leave and I'm done. That's the problem. An ecosystem doesn't exist just with ground and grass. An ecosystem exists with that fertile ground, the lush vegetation, and then all the creatures that thrive in that environment. They pollinate the flowers, they eat the vegetation, they live in it, all those things. And in our example, the creatures represent your community. These are the people that are feeding off of this lush environment. And so the key with an ecosystem is that all these three things are working together in a dynamic way. You have your cause, you have your content, you have your community. They all have to come together. If any one of them is isolated, it's no longer thriving, it's dying. And so many times what I've seen happen is people have an amazing cause, but they can't figure out the content. Or they have an amazing community of people that really love them, but they're not feeding them anything that they need. And so they wonder, well, why isn't this working? Well, this is why it's not working. Unless we bring these things together in a dynamic way and create an ecosystem for the content, there's no way that it can thrive, no way that it can be successful, no way that it can do what it needs to do. So the question I have for you is your content sitting somewhere isolated, locked away on a computer, in a book, and really disconnected from the world? Or is your content part of a thriving ecosystem that is founded in a rich cause and being experienced and engaged by a dynamic community? If that's not the case, then we have some work to do. What I want to tell you is that the books and trainings and ideas that thrive in this next century will be ones that have a lush ecosystem around them. So let's get to work and design yours.